my son was totally exonerated by Mueller, who, frankly, does not like Donald Trump, this Donald Trump. And frankly, for my son, after being exonerated, to now get a subpoena to go again and speak again after close to 20 hours of telling everybody that would listen about a nothing meeting, yeah, I'm pretty surprised.
A member of the House Judiciary Committee joins me now, Republican Andy Biggs of Arizona. So glad to get you on this breaking news. Thank you for being with me. First of all, why subpoena Donald Trump Jr.?
Well, Harris, I don't really know. It seemed odd to me when I heard about it, and there really is no explanation as far as I can see. And so, you know, he testified for a long time, and unless they're going to conduct an additional investigation, it doesn't make any sense to subpoena Donald Trump Jr. to come testify before the Senate Intel Committee. That makes sense.
Well, you know, moments ago, the president termed it this way. He said the Mueller report, for the first time that I'd heard him call it the Bible. He said that out of all of those 1 year plus days of a $40 million investigation, and he went on to list, as he always does on Twitter and whatnot, 18 angry Democrats on Bob Mueller's team, so on and so forth with those attorneys. After all of that, nothing should have pointed to Donald Trump Jr. Is he right about that as far as you've known?
Yeah, I think so, because I've read the report, the 93% that's available to us, Harris, and there's nothing there that indicates that Don Trump Jr. Did anything that's contrary to the law, and there was no indication by the Mueller team that they needed further investigation on anybody. Quite frankly, they had pulled the plug on that investigation, and so that's why it seems so awkward to me to see that the Senate is going to pursue this, especially after Mitch McConnell said the case is closed.
Well,
case closed.
Congressman Biggs, I just want to ask about where we are. You said 93% unredacted. Some have it up as 98.5 if you go in that skip at the DOJ for Jerry Nadler and a few other Democrats to be able to do that. They haven't done it yet, even though they could, so nearly all unredacted at that point. But when you look at this and you hear the president using this lingo, that's the Bible, why do you think he terms it like that, and is he right about it?
Well, I think what he's trying to get at is this is what everybody put their faith in, particularly the Democrats put their faith in for 2 years, you know, and it is like he says, you had 19 19 lawyers, you had 40 agents, 2,800 subpoenas, etc. And it was supposed to be exhaustive. The documents there, in fact, Jerry Nadler could go down and read it anytime he wants. He doesn't really want to get down there and see it. And I think that's why he's referring it to as kind of the Bible. It is supposed to be the doctrine, if you will, on this subject, and it indicates pretty clearly that there were no indictments and there was no collusion or cooperation or coordination between anybody on the Trump campaign with the Russians. And so I view it as simply him saying, you know, that's it. It's over and done with, and he's right. We should be moving on. And if we're investigating anything, it should be, how did this spurious investigation get started to begin with? Well,
and what the president said, no crime, but crime was committed on the other side. Those were his exact words today. Attorney General William Barr had a 30-plus year relationship, we know from him at his confirmation hearings, with Bob Mueller. Now we have a situation where executive privilege has been executed by the White House. We learned this yesterday. They will now compel him not to testify. Does that help or not, keeping Bob Mueller out of the spotlight, if you will, on Capitol Hill?
Well, you know, it's done. He came and testified before the Senate last week. He answered all the questions. I thought he did a great job, quite frankly. And Jerry Nadler said, we want to treat this like an impeachment hearing. So at that point, there's no point to even begin trying to cooperate anymore, because Mr. Nadler has made it pretty clear. Hank Johnson of Georgia spilled the beans yesterday during the hearing when he says, well, this is all about impeachment. Because that's really what it is. There's a cadre within the Democrats that want to impeach. There's a cadre that say that'd be bad for us. But Hank Johnson made it pretty clear. They want to try to impeach this president, and that's what this is all about. So start your impeachment hearings then. Go ahead and take real testimony then, if that's really what you're going to do.
You know, speaking of which, earlier today, Speaker Nancy Pelosi revived the notion that President Trump is, quote, self-impeaching. Let's take a watch. I'd love to get your reaction on that.
Yesterday, the president is almost self-impeaching because he is every day demonstrating more obstruction of justice and disrespect for Congress's legitimate role to subpoena.
Self-impeachment, I've never heard of that.
Well, it makes me want to laugh out loud, Harris, if you want the truth. I think, she's just making it up as she goes along. She says self-impeachment. She says he's obstructing justice. Can you tell us how in the world he's obstructing justice? Can you tell us what the investigation is that he's hindering at this point? And the fact of the matter is she's just kind of making it up as she goes along, which gets back to the original point. This is being done for political purposes because they don't like Donald Trump and they're gearing for the 2020 election. That's what this is all about.
All right, one last one for you, because I think we are at that point now where we're getting closer to the Inspector General coming out with his report. And what are we anticipating with that? And what impact does that have on the Mueller report and the fight for complete unredaction?
Well, I think what's going to happen is when that comes out, you're going to find some people like Comey, Strzok, Page, Andy McCabe, maybe even Clapper and Brennan that are going to have some explaining to do because their FISA abuse is there. I think that's what we're going to see. I would anticipate that to come out in the next 4 to 8 weeks, and I'm looking forward to it. But the other one, too, is I hope Mr. Huber gets going and lets us know what he's been doing, too. So there's 2 investigations going right now, have nothing to do with President Trump at this point.
All right. Congressman Andy Biggs of the great state of Arizona, good to see you today. Thank you for your time.
Well, the House Democrats issuing a subpoena for the unredacted Mueller report after voting to hold Attorney General Bill Barr in contempt of Congress for not handing it over.
This administration, this president will not sully the Constitution.
The president now seeks to take a wrecking ball through the Constitution.
This is one of the most serious, if not the most serious, constitutional moment that we have faced.
The President of the United States is a wannabe dictator with authoritarian tendencies.
We are now in a constitutional crisis.
Okay, that's what he says. So what happens next? Let's talk to Fox News senior judicial analyst and host of Liberty File on Fox Nation, Judge Napolitano. Judge, they were asking for the unredacted version of the Mueller report. By law, that cannot be released to Congress.
That's correct. By law, the Attorney General did the right thing with respect to the redaction. But when you get a subpoena, which is presumed valid, even if it's politically motivated, it's presumed valid, it's a legal instrument, you can't sit on it. If you can't comply with it, you file a motion before the appropriate judge to quash it. That's the word we use, meaning either get rid of it, modify it, or authorize me to comply with it.
You're talking about his appearance last week?
Yes, that's the mistake I think the DOJ made by not doing that and letting it get to this contempt stage. If they had brought it before a judge, the judge would have said, you know what, I'm going to read the redacted portions and I'll decide what can be released. And then the issue is over with because the judge's ruling would stand. Whoever lost would appeal. Who knows if they would even take the appeal, if it would get to the Supreme Court. This is what happened in United States versus Nixon, and the Supreme Court ruled with clarity. Do we have a constitutional crisis? In my opinion, we don't. We would have a constitutional crisis if the courts ordered the president or the Congress to do something and either of them defied the courts. That's the crisis. Right now it's just a clash.
Judge, do you feel as though a judge would take into account the fact that they didn't even show up to get the lightly redacted portion of the Mueller report, which is up to 98% as opposed to 92%?
I think a judge would take into account all the facts in the case. Judges, the reason... I was once there. The reason they are life tenured is so that they don't have to get involved in the politics. They're just concerned with whether or not the redacted materials, the public interest in them outweighs the privacy rights of those being protected. There are some people in there, I have reason to believe, whose names we don't know, who are not politicians, who are officials of the government, who risk their lives to do our work.
Plus,
no good would come from revealing their names. There's also materials in there that I don't think is subject to executive privilege because some of it has nothing to do with communications with the president. Only a judge in her chambers can look at all that and decide, did Bill Barr do the right thing? Am I going to authorize him to release this stuff, even though the rule says you're not supposed to release it?
Nancy Pelosi sat down with a Washington Post reporter, and she talked about the investigation. She talked about tax returns, Trump's tax returns, and she said that she wants to basically lock up many in the administration. Listen.
Democrats have even raised the prospect of arresting the Treasury Secretary if he does not comply with congressional demands.
If we were arresting all of the people in the administration, we would have overcrowded jail situation, and I'm not for that.
There is,
There
is a jail in the basement of Congress.
Theoretically, there is. I say theoretically because it hasn't been used. That's a political statement.
Of course.
We all know why. Politicians on both sides, they all make political statements. I don't know what the president's tax returns have to do with this. We're talking about the redacted portions of the Mueller report. The real clash will come when the House Judiciary Committee subpoenas Bob Mueller himself, and the president says, I don't want you to
So we're not
testify.
at a crisis, we're at a clash.
Correct.
This whole thing was an insult to the one's intelligence and logic because they don't care about the redacted. No one says, if I could only see behind that black rectangle,
You know,
I would know, my life would be complete.
It's crazy because it's such a battle over a document that none of them has seen.
Absolutely.
All the best, guys.
Thank you very much.
Where's Janice? How do I have some of that
She's
cake?
cutting the cake.
Where are the
Finding a
flowers,
vase.
Janice?
She's finding a vase.
She's planning the wedding.
Oh, God love you.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us, Judge.
Oh, I was with these cops this morning. They're great guys.
Yeah,
What are you reading the prompter?
I was on one of the bikes.
They're going to be outside. They're outside. We're going to talk to them next.